But racism is still very powerful in England today, and what was so interesting was to be able to put a book out which said to black people living in England now, you have a history, a heroic history, which goes back hundreds of years. Don't let anybody ever tell you arrived in the 1950s. That's not the case in England. Black people have been in England actually since the Roman legions. And there's even a story about a Roman legionnaire on Hadrian's Wall, which is nearly Scotland. And when a visiting general came to inspect them, he was given a punishment for being cheeky. So it's just a long, long history and a very brave history. It caused me a lot of trouble. My hometown is Bristol. And when I was probably about your age, I was at a commemoration service for my school's founder. My school's founder was a man called Edward Colston. And I had gone all the way through school, studying history. We even studied slavery at one time. You'll be pleased to hear the way my school taught slavery is it was fundamentally a few people from England taking poor African slaves, terrible tragedy, to those awful people in America. So we made sure which way the guilt went. It was all you. You would think we had done nothing to it whatsoever. Anyway, I was at the commemoration service. I was a scholarship kid at this school. I didn't have very much money when I was growing up. My mother was a widow. We didn't have a wage coming in. And she wanted me to go to this good school. And I sat the exam and I won a scholarship. And my fees were paid by a bequest by the school's founder, Edward Colston. And so I was sitting at the commemoration service, and the motto of the school was Edward Colston's motto, and we used to say the prayer, let us now praise famous men and our fathers that begat us. And it was a big hurrah day for Edward Colston, who had founded the school, particularly for me, because he paid for my education. And this priest stood up and said, you may not know this, but Edward Colston's fortune came from slave trading. You could have heard a pin drop. We had never, ever learned this. I had never learned this. And I suddenly realized that I personally benefited from slave trade money. I was educated by slave trade money. And the joy and the irony of, therefore, writing a book which explained about the slave trade to modern people today was just tremendous. And I set it in Bristol. And the city fathers were absolutely torn between being so furious with me for putting Bristol on the map for being a slave trade city, and then absolutely excited because it went into a television program. And one of the things you can be sure is that as soon as one of your books is made into film or television, you have friends that you had no idea loved you and admired you as much as they turn out to do. As soon as I started calling Scarlett Johansson Scarlett, I suddenly found that there were so many young men who wanted to come out with me, on the off chance that Scarlett and I were going out drinking. And I'll tell you about Eric Bana later. To do the research for this novel, I decided to go to an African country and to see for myself what remains there were, what ruins there were as a consequence of slavery, and to learn what I could about Africa today. And I chose to go to the Gambia. Those of you who know the program Roots, that's where the original character of the enslaved African lived in the Gambia, and he actually truly did live there. And you can even go to his village today and meet his descendants. Whether they honestly, truly are his descendants or not, I don't know, but they're making a very nice living from it, and so they should. It's perfectly reasonable they should do so. And while I was there, I went, as you do on one of these trips out, and I went to a village school, and I was waiting in the road for the school to open. I had some stationery and some pens, which is what you take to the Gambia because we know that the kids are so poor. And down the road came these little kids, some of them 4 or 5, carrying on their heads, washing up bowls and buckets of water. And that was the water they were going to drink during the day. And on the steps of the school were sacks of monkey nuts, peanuts in their shells, and that was all that they would have to eat on during the day. They would eat breakfast, they'd go right the way through the school day, and they'd go back to their parents and eat at night. The schoolhouse itself was built of breeze blocks with a corrugated roof. This is in an incredibly hot tropical African country. It gets so hot inside you wouldn't believe. The kids sit on the ground. They mostly wear a school uniform of like blue tie-dye. They call it batik. It's a fabric they can make themselves very cheaply. And they come in and they sit maybe 40 or 50 in a classroom, and they learn as the teacher repeats things to them, because they don't have books, they don't have paper, they don't have pens. And the schoolmaster said to me that what he wanted to do was to raise money to put a well in the schoolyard, and would I help do that? And as many of you know, I agreed to fund the first well. I asked him how much it would be, and he said it would be, in those days, £300 for a well. And I thought, well, it's like a bit of a gamble. If he's a bit of a crook, then I'm about to make a fool of myself and lose £300. If, on the other hand, he is, as I kind of feel he is, an honest and an honourable man, then I'll have done something so good that regardless of what else I've done in my life, I am certain to get to heaven. And for £300, I have to tell you, you're young people, but let me tell you this and take it through your life, to get to heaven for £300 is a very good deal indeed. So I thought, well, I'll give him the money and I'll see what happens. I gave him the money. I went back to England. This is 14 years ago, and the communications, we didn't have emails. Can you imagine how primitive is this? He didn't send me a message with a cleft stick, I want to tell you. It was only 14 years ago. He sent me a fax. And he said, "Dear Miss Gregory, thank you very much for your contribution. We've dug the well. We've planted the garden. There are salad vegetables growing. The children are learning new techniques in agriculture. They're drinking water throughout the day from the well. We're very, very grateful to you. Thank you, your friend Ismaila Cisse. P.S. The next door school would very much like a well. Would you send the money?" And I had a moment where I went like, well, why not? This is just fantastic. If this works, and it can work again, then that's 2 wells dug. So I was doing some journalism then, I wrote a little article about it. People sent me tiny sums of money, £5, £1, but just added up. I sent the money out, he dug a well. People kept sending me money, I kept sending it out, he kept digging a well. It's a system so small and so simple. It's me raising the money, I send it to him. He has it in the Gambia, he digs wells. And from that, we have become, in the Gambia, the largest well-digging charity in the Gambia. I have to say bigger than the European Union, bigger than Canada, bigger than the US, because they dig wells too, but nobody digs as many as we do. One of the reasons for that is that we dig such silly little wells. We don't dig, the European Union dug a well, I went to see it, it was solar powered. It was the swankiest well you could ever see. I looked at it and I went, hey, I'm wasting my time with these little wells in the ground. What I want is one of these things, great big structure like scaffolding, solar panels on the top, special electric pump, great big reservoir of water, fantastic. I went, wow, I said, how much did it cost? He said, £2.5 million. I said, that's a lot of books, really. I mean, I'm doing very well, but that's an awful lot of books. And I went, well, that's a lot of money. And they said, and it doesn't work. I said, how come it doesn't work? And they said, well, this is our well. And I said, did I put a well in this village? They said, yeah, come and see it. And at the bottom of this fancy tower, there's this little hole in the ground with a rope and a bucket and a wall round it, and that's my well. I said, fantastic, good. But why have we put our well next door to their big well? Because when the European engineers came, the African people said to the European engineers, we don't think it will work because it's solar powered. And the European engineers said, this is Africa. What's your problem? And they said, the rainy season. It rains for 3 months. And they said, that's okay. During that 3 months, you can use the other water, and the water that the well has pumped will be stored. And they said, if you say so. Because they're very polite. They said, if you say so, thank you very much. So the Europeans built their fancy structure, went away. The rainy season came, so the solar power didn't work, so the water wasn't pumped up from the ground. It went into the reservoir. It got covered in a green algae. Nobody would touch it. Everybody thought it was going to kill them. They were probably right, it would have done. And then when the sun came out again, the solar panels didn't work because they were covered with mold. And in the shadow of this well is our little well, and it's watering that village garden, and it's feeding those kids, and it's watering the school. And that's why we don't go in, I say we, it's 2 of us, Ismail and I don't go into a village and say, we're going to do this for you, and we're going to do that for you, and this is how you do it. We go in and say, what would you like? And they say, we'd like a well. And we say, well, just do you like a little one like we do? And they say, yes. And we hire our well digger, who comes out with his bowl. He doesn't have a spade. And he just spins round, digs his hole. We go down 16 metres, and there's generally water at the bottom. It doesn't always work. Some things do go wrong sometimes. But almost every well that we've dug has come on stream and been successful.